The story of the Black Dahlia is etched into the soul of Los Angeles. It's a ghost story, a cautionary tale, a Hollywood nightmare that's all too real. On January 15th, 1947, a woman walking with her child in the Limerick Park neighborhood saw something in a vacant lot. She thought it was a discarded mannequin. It wasn't. It was the body of a young woman, Elizabeth Short. But it was more than that. Her body was severed in half at the waist. It was drained of blood. Her face was carved into a grotesque, permanent smile, a cut from ear to ear. The press called it a Glasgow smile. The murder was brutal, precise, and deeply strange. Sure, it was a spectacle. The killer wanted it to be found. He wanted it to be seen. The investigation that followed was one of the largest in lap-dead history. It consumed the city. Hundreds of officers worked the case. Thousands of people were interviewed. Confessions poured in, dozens of them, all false. The newspapers, locked in a circulation war, were relentless. They dubbed her the Black Dahlia, a nickname she may or may not have had in life. They printed salacious details, many of them fabricated, painting her as a tragic, wayward soul lost in the city's glamour and grime. And then nothing. The trail went cold, the leads dried up, the case became a legend, a permanent question mark hanging over the city. Who killed Elizabeth Short? For over 50 years, the answer was a shrug. It was an unsolvable puzzle, a favorite topic for crime writers and amateur sleuths, but officially it was a dead end. And then, a retired lap-dead homicide detective started looking into the case. This wasn't unusual. Cops often get obsessed with old, cold cases, but this was different. This detective was named Steve Hodel, and the suspect he zeroed in on, the man he believed was the monster who killed the Black Dahlia, was his own father. His father was Dr. George Hodel. To understand the theory, you first have to understand George Hodel. He wasn't just a doctor, he was a figure straight out of a noir film. He was brilliant. A certified genius with an IQ reportedly around 186. He was a musical prodigy as a child. He finished high school early and breezed through Caltech before going to medical school. He was handsome, charming, and moved easily in the highest circles of Los Angeles society. He ran a successful venereal disease clinic in the city. He owned a famous house in Hollywood, the Soudan House, a Mayan revival masterpiece designed by Lloyd Wright, son of the legendary Frank Lloyd Wright. The house itself was imposing, almost sinister, with a large central courtyard and rooms that felt more like chambers in a temple than a family home. It was in this house that Dr. Hodel hosted legendary parties. The guests were a mix of Hollywood stars, artists, intellectuals, and powerful figures. Man Ray, the famous surrealist photographer and painter, was a close friend. So was the director John Huston. George Hodel was a man of culture, a lover of art, especially the surrealist movement, which was obsessed with dreams, the subconscious, and the violent disruption of reality. But there was another side to him, a much darker one. He had a voracious and often predatory sexual appetite. He had numerous wives, mistresses, and children. His own daughter, Tamar, accused him of incest in 1949. The trial was a massive scandal. Hodel was a prominent doctor, and the allegations were shocking. He hired a top lawyer and was ultimately acquitted. But the damage was done. The trial revealed a disturbing side to the brilliant doctor, a man who seemed to live by his own rules with no regard for convention or morality. His family life was a chaotic mess of secrets and dysfunction. This was the man Steve Hodel grew up with and then grew apart from. Little Steve became a cop, working homicide for the lap-dead for nearly 25 years. He saw the worst of what people could do to each other. He was a good detective, respected. By the time his father died in 1999, they were estranged. It was while going through his father's possessions after his death that Steve Hodel's life changed forever. He found a small photo album. Inside were pictures of family and friends. And then he saw 2 photos of a woman with dark hair. He froze. He had spent his career looking at crime scenes, at victims. He knew faces. He was almost certain. He was looking at a photograph of Elizabeth Short. That was the starting point. A retired cop, a set of old photos, and a terrible suspicion about his own father. He didn't want to believe it. Who would? But the detective in him couldn't let it go. He started digging, and what he found began to form a terrifying and surprisingly coherent picture. The first piece of the puzzle was the murder itself. The way Elizabeth Short's body was treated was not random or frenzied. It was clinical. Her body was cut in half with a technique known as a hemicorporectomy. This is a highly specialized surgical procedure, something a butcher or a construction worker wouldn't know how to do. It's a procedure used to separate the lower half of the body from the upper half. The cuts were clean, precise, they showed a deep understanding of human anatomy. George Hodel was a surgeon. He had spent years cutting into human bodies. He would have possessed the exact skill set required to perform such a bisection. Furthermore, the body was completely drained of blood before it was dumped. This also suggested a killer with medical knowledge, someone who knew how to handle a body in a way that minimized mess and made it easier to transport. And the body had been washed, the killer was methodical, he was not a panicked amateur. He was a professional, in his own twisted way. Then there was the location. The Sounding House, George Hodel's home, was located in Hollywood, just a few miles from the vacant lot where Elizabeth Short's body was found. It was an easy drive. She was an aspiring actress who frequented Hollywood hangouts. Their paths could have easily crossed. Steve Hodel believed his father met her, seduced her, and brought her back to his strange, imposing home. But Steve needed more than just proximity and medical skill. He needed direct evidence. He turned to the taunting notes the killer sent to the press after the murder. The killer mailed a package to the Los Angeles Examiner containing Elizabeth Short's social security card, birth certificate, and other personal items. He also sent a series of letters, pasted together from newspaper and magazine clippings, mocking the police. "Here it is," one note read. "Turning in wed, Jan 29, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia Avenger." He never turned himself in. Steve Hodel took samples of his father's handwriting from old letters and documents. He submitted them, along with copies of the killer's notes, to a top-tier, board-certified handwriting expert. The expert was not told who the suspect was or any details of the case. He was just given the 2 sets of writing. His conclusion was startling. He found a high probability of a match. The way certain letters were formed, the spacing, the style, it all pointed to the same hand. It wasn't a 100% certainty, nothing in handwriting analysis is, but it was a powerful piece of circumstantial evidence. The deeper Steve Hodel dug, the more the pieces seemed to click into place. He remembered his father's friendship with Man Ray. He started studying surrealist art. He looked at Man Ray's paintings and photographs like Minotaur and The Lovers. They often featured dismembered mannequins, distorted female forms, and faces with unsettling smiles. He saw a direct artistic line between the surrealist art his father loved and the gruesome way Elizabeth Short's body was posed. The Glasgow smile carved into her face was a recurring motif in surrealist imagery. Was the murder a piece of performance art? A grotesque masterpiece created by a man who saw himself as a surrealist artist, using a human body as his canvas. It was a chilling thought, but it fit George Hodel's personality, the genius with a god complex, the man who lived outside the rules. It explained the theatrical nature of the crime, the posing of the body, the taunting of the police. The killer wasn't just a murderer, he was an artist demanding an audience. As Steve Hodel continued his private investigation, he made his most shocking discovery. He filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. He wanted to see the old files on the Black Dahlia case. After a long wait, he got them. And buried in those dusty boxes was a bombshell. The files revealed that back in 1950, 3 years after the murder, the Laptey and the DA's office had identified a prime suspect in the Black Dahlia case. That suspect was Dr. George Hodel. Following the incest trial, even though he was acquitted, Hodel was on the authorities' radar. They suspected him of not only the Dahlia murder, but other crimes as well, including the possible murder of his own secretary who had died of an overdose. They believed Hodel was a serial killer. So, from February to March of 1950, they placed microphones, or bugs, in his home, the Sounding House. They secretly recorded his conversations for weeks. The transcripts from those recordings were explosive. On one tape, Hodel is heard talking to a friend about the police investigation. He says, "They're trying to figure out the Black Dahlia killing. They think I'm the killer." Then, there's a chilling, self-incriminating monologue when Hodel is alone in the house. The detectives listening on the wire heard him say, "Realizing there was nothing I could do, put a pillow over her head and cover her with a blanket. Get a taxi. Incommunicado. Don't talk. Turn over. They can't prove a thing. They can't talk to my secretary anymore. She's dead." And then came the most damning line of all. He was heard saying, clear as day, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore." It was a confession, or as close to one as you could get. Here was the prime suspect in his own home, admitting he might have done it. So why wasn't he arrested? Why wasn't he charged? The answer, Steve Hodel believes, lies in the deep-seated corruption of the Lapdead at the time. George Hodel was not just a doctor, he was a well-connected man who knew the city's secrets. He ran a VD clinic, which meant he had files on powerful people politicians, police chiefs, Hollywood moguls. He likely performed illegal abortions for the rich and famous. He knew where the bodies were buried, literally and figuratively. To prosecute George Hodel would be to open a can of worms that the city's elite wanted to keep sealed shut. The police were also worried that the bugging itself was illegal, and any evidence from it would be thrown out of court. So, they backed off. Shortly after the surveillance ended, George Hodel seemed to realize the walls were closing in. He abruptly left the country. He moved to Hawaii and then to the Philippines, where he lived for decades. He didn't return to the United States permanently until 1990. By then, most of the original Dahlia investigators were dead. The trail was ice cold. He had gotten away with it. Steve Hodel compiled all his evidence into a book, Black Dahlia Avenger. It caused a sensation. Here was a decorated lapdad detective accusing his own father of one of the most famous unsolved murders in American history. And he had evidence to back it up. Not just a hunch, but handwriting analysis, official surveillance records, and a deep understanding of his father's twisted psychology. After the book was published, more evidence emerged. A former DA for Los Angeles County, Stephen Kay, reviewed Steve Hodel's evidence. Kay, who had prosecuted the Manson family, was a man who knew a thing or two about bizarre, high-profile murders. After looking at the case Steve had built, he said publicly that if George Hodel were alive today, he would have no hesitation in filing murder charges. He called the case extremely strong. Then there was the soil. Steve Hodel brought a cadaver dog, a dog specially trained to detect the scent of human decomposition, to the Soden house. In the basement, the dog alerted strongly in several spots, suggesting that a dead body had once laid there, its fluids seeping into the soil beneath the house. Soil samples were taken from the basement and analyzed. They tested positive for the chemical signatures of human remains. It wasn't definitive proof of murder, but it was another piece of the puzzle, suggesting something terrible had happened in the basement of that house. Of course, the theory is not without its critics. Skeptics point out that Steve Hodel has a financial interest in the story. He's written multiple books about his father, expanding his theory to include other unsolved murders, like the lipstick murders in Chicago, and even the Zodiac killings in Northern California. This leap, to some, strains credibility, making it seem less like a focused investigation and more like a grand, all-encompassing conspiracy theory. They also question the evidence itself. Is the woman in the photograph really Elizabeth Short? Some photo analysts have said it's a close resemblance, but not a definitive match. Handwriting analysis is often considered a subjective science, not hard proof. And the lapdad surveillance transcripts are incomplete. The most damning lines are there, but we don't have the full context of the conversation. Could he have been speaking hypothetically? Could he have been toying with the police he knew were likely listening? With a mind like George Hodel's, it's possible. And perhaps the biggest hurdle is the lack of a smoking gun. There is no DNA evidence linking George Hodel to the crime. There's no murder weapon. No witness ever came forward to say they saw Elizabeth Short with the doctor. What exists is a mountain of circumstantial evidence. Each piece on its own might be explained away. The medical skill? Many doctors have that. The location? Los Angeles is a big city, but Hollywood is a small world. The handwriting? It's a matter of expert opinion, but when you put all the pieces together, it becomes much harder to dismiss. The medical knowledge, the surrealist connections, the proximity, the handwriting, the family history of darkness and abuse, and most importantly, the lapd's own secret investigation and the damning words caught on their surveillance tapes. It all points in one direction. It all points to the house on Franklin Avenue. It all points to the brilliant, charming, and monstrous Dr. George Hodel. The case of the Black Dahlia is officially still unsolved. The Los Angeles Police Department has never closed it, but for many, Steve Hodel has provided the most plausible, detailed, and terrifying solution ever put forward. It's a story that feels true to the city it happened in. A story of glamour and corruption, of brilliant surfaces and rotten cores. A story about how a man could be a respected doctor, a pillar of the community, and a sadistic killer all at the same time. Could the Black Dahlia have been killed by a Hollywood doctor? It seems more than possible. It seems likely. The story of Steve Hodel's investigation doesn't just offer a name for a faceless killer. It paints a portrait of a man capable of a crime. A man with the skill, the motive, the opportunity, and the arrogance to think he could get away with it. And for more than half a century, it seems he did. The ghost of Elizabeth Short still haunts Los Angeles, but now her story has a second ghost standing right beside her. The shadow of the man who was a father, a genius, a doctor, and quite possibly a monster.